This is Living Catholic with Father Don Wolf. Living Catholic is a fresh look at issues confronting each of us today. This show deals with living Catholic, what that means for Catholics, as well as the impact on the rest of society. You certainly don't have to be Catholic to enjoy this show. And now your host, Father Don Wolf.
Welcome, Oklahoma, to Living Catholic. I'm Father Don Wolf, pastor of Sacred Heart Parish and rector of the Shrine of Blessed Stanley Rother in Oklahoma City. This coming week, I'm in Guadalajara, Mexico, with Father Joe Irwin of St. Joseph's Parish in Norman. We're taking part in a clergy convocation being held in the Archdiocese of Guadalajara from Monday evening to Thursday morning. It's a chance for us, too, to interact with the priests there and to talk to Francisco Cardinal Robles. It should be an interesting time. Our mission is to invite priests there to come to Oklahoma so that we might more readily respond to the Mexican population here in our archdiocese. The Cardinal has given us permission to talk to the priests there about our needs here in Oklahoma, as well as to describe the challenges and the opportunities that are part of our pastoral reality here. Our goal is to have a number of the priests there to take up the challenge and volunteer to come and serve here in Oklahoma. It may be a long shot, but we had to take it. We couldn't say no to the opportunity to be there. And besides, the city of Guadalajara is one of the nicest in Mexico. It's hardly a burden to visit there. Now, the need is obvious. Hispanics, especially Mexicans, make up a huge part of the Catholic Church here in Oklahoma. They've been present in Oklahoma since statehood, but over the last 50 years, this population has grown to epic proportions throughout the state. Just a brief drive through South Oklahoma City is enough to disclose how much the Mexican presence dominates the horizon, along with the signs and shops and grocery stores that have opened to supply the needs of the people. There are churches, one after the other, that are predominantly Spanish-speaking. Just the other day, I was walking from I-240 to Southwest 44th Street, and I counted more than 20 Hispanic churches on that short walk. Almost 30 years ago, the Mexican journalist Enrique Krause wrote that people south of the border come to the U.S. to, quote, get a job, buy a house, and go to church, unquote. In this part of Oklahoma City, they've certainly done all three. But we Catholics have had a hard time responding to this reality. The numbers have overwhelmed us, and we don't have enough priests to respond to the need. Here in Oklahoma City, we have a number of parishes that are predominantly Spanish-speaking, including Sacred Heart, which is about 99% Spanish-speaking. But even with all of the people involved in those parishes, we're only responding to the barest percentage. And the challenge is even greater in the towns outside of Oklahoma City. There are swaths of the state in which we have no priests and no parishes, and yet the counties are filled with Mexican families. We've not been able to respond to their needs or even begin to gather them to meet and pray because we don't have sufficient personnel. We need help. This is why Archbishop Coakley has asked us to make the trip to Guadalajara and to speak to the priests there. It's a chance for us to talk about our needs as well as to describe the opportunities available here for those who would come to work. There's so much to do, so many people to meet and serve. The fields are ripe for harvest. I've been to Mexico before, seeking to develop the structures of opportunity and communication with the priests there. When I was president of the National Federation of Priests Councils from 1997 to 2000, I began a pilot program to design a structure by which the priests of Mexico could communicate and share their wisdom with the priests of the United States. Both groups have valuable experiences that would enrich each other. It's a shame we have no facility to communicate directly with one another. I thought that if we could develop a decent structure so as to talk to one another, we'd all be better off. Not only that, if we could be in better communication about the needs we have throughout the United States for priests to serve the growing Mexican population, it'd be easier and more straightforward for the priests there to serve their people as they come to the U.S. It seemed like a good idea, and I wanted to see what we could do. So my plan all those years ago was to visit the Cardinal of Mexico City, since he is the highest-ranking member of the clergy in the country and the leader of the bishops there. So with all that in mind, in 1999, I flew down to Mexico City to visit with him. He was gracious. He gave me a long interview, and after listening to my ideas, he sent me on to the Cardinal in Guadalajara. I left the same day to get an appointment with him, and miraculously, I was able to secure one for the next day. As I came into his office, he explained to me that he was not going to send priests to work in the U.S. He obviously thought I'd come down to beg for priests to work in Oklahoma. And when I explained my ideas, he calmed down a bit. But he expanded on his comment to me. He said, "We're still coming out of a nearly 200-year-long clergy shortage caused by the political and economic crises of our country. For all these centuries, we've struggled to have the priests we need to serve our people in the way that they deserve. Now that we're finally ordaining a number of young men to the priesthood, we're not yet able to spare any for service outside of the diocese. In the future, perhaps we will, but not yet." He was adamant about that. I'm glad my ideas at the time were more expansive. But over the last 20 years, things have changed. Guadalajara has had a wonderful growth in its clergy, and it is ordaining classes never seen before. Last year, they ordained 140 priests, all in one class. Admittedly, it is a city of 13 million, so it has great needs all of its own. But the church is alive and well there, and it boasts the largest seminary in the world. They've grown, and the cardinal is now able to listen to the requests that come from the rest of the world, including from here in Oklahoma. The church in Guadalajara is now able to help us in our need, which is the heart of the Christian life. It's also the heart of the missionary vocation. The norm for the whole church is that we can supply one another's needs. As St. Paul pointed out, those who have can give to those who have not. With the current surplus from the middle of Mexico, the needs we have can be supplied. At least that's our hope. With additional priests coming to us from the south, we can begin to address our concerns for our people from across the river. As part of my project from 1999, a number of Mexican bishops met and talked about our plans. One of them, Bishop Suarez Inda from Morelia, Michoacan, admitted that the church in Mexico had to accept the challenge of providing the ministry necessary to serve the millions of Mexicans in the U.S. And he admitted that it was the responsibility of bishops like him to initiate the process of serving those who come to the U.S. So far, his sentiments haven't produced a great deal of fruit, at least not here in the heartland. But perhaps we're on the cusp of change. I hope so. There are some challenges we have to face as we invite the priests to come. And the first is simple: connection. While we do have many people from Mexico here in Oklahoma, not many come from the state of Jalisco or from the city of Guadalajara. There are a few, of course, but most of the Spanish-speaking among us come from other areas. To invite priests to come to Oklahoma is to invite them to a place they don't know and in which they won't have a lot of support from family or friends. There are many other places in the U.S. in which they would be surrounded by their own people. And this is a challenge, since those same priests could go to California or Chicago and slip in easily with the people they know and are familiar with. Virtually every family from that part of Mexico does have somebody in the U.S. In fact, several years ago, I went with one of the priests from the seminary in Guadalajara to visit the small parish he takes care of. It's a small town up in the mountains north of the city. We were there for Mass on Wednesday evening, attended mostly by older women and children. I asked him where all the men were. He told me it was one of the towns in which all of the young men of working age were gone to the U.S. The only ones left in town were the women, the grandparents, and the children. Over the last several generations, the interchange of Mexico and the U.S. has been profound. While the priest might not know much about Oklahoma, and likely they won't, they will have a surprisingly strong connection to the U.S. One of the distinctive elements of Guadalajara is that it also has a relatively large American presence. There are a good number of expatriates living around Lago Chapala, just to the north of the city. In fact, I was once invited to happy hour at the local VFW in a small town on the shores of the lake when I was visiting there in Guadalajara. Compared to, say, the populations of Mexicans living in Oklahoma City, it's pretty small. But there is a U.S. presence there in Guadalajara, and it is noticeable. The priests from there will have some connection to that reality as well. course, Mexicans are like the rest of us. They are regional and understand themselves and one another by where they come from. People from the states of northern Mexico are unlike those who come from the south, for example. Each region has its own style of dress and music and food. Even their styles of speaking are different. Think of someone from Boston compared to someone from Dallas compared to someone from LA. It's like that in Mexico. Those from Jalisco are not going to relate automatically to those from Aguascalientes or Durango. It'll take work for them to fit in. After all, once you leave home, it's not easy to be a stranger in a strange place. And that will be a challenge for any priest who comes here to Oklahoma. Oklahoma is a different kind of place religiously, too. Although the church is growing here and our parishes are full, our state is still Protestant, with very different kinds of attitudes and understandings compared to Catholics. This will also be a challenge for the priests who would come, who are arriving from the most Catholic part of one of the largest Catholic countries in the world. While they would not be shocked, they certainly will be surprised to find Mexican Baptists, Mexican Pentecostals, and Mexican Mormons. We have all of them here in our fair city. Learning to relate to the people that they'll find here won't be easy. It wouldn't be easy for anyone. Were they to go to a city with a truly Catholic culture like Chicago or New York, they'd feel much more at home. Oklahoma would be harder for them. In addition, they'll have to face the challenge of the multi-generational aspect of the Mexican Catholic Church in Oklahoma. When the first generation arrives from Mexico, their identity and their understanding, they're intact and well established. Even if they've been here for decades and have integrated themselves well into the life of the culture here, they are Mexicans living in the U.S. But the next generation isn't the same. They are Americans. They may speak Spanish and listen to Mexican music and go back to visit their parents' hometown, but they think and act American, or at least Mexican-American. Their values and understandings and relationship to the church are theirs, not their parents'. Those priests who come from Mexico will have to learn to relate to them as well. They're different. No matter what the priests from Mexico can do when they arrive, they'll never be able to recreate the world they know. Of course, we want them to bring all the best of their experience and wisdom to serve their people here. We don't want them to be different. The reason they're coming is because of their roots and their knowledge. But inevitably, what they will create by way of their ministry is something new. This has been the truth of expatriates throughout the history of the church in the U.S. What they create is unique to their situation. Chicago was probably the most famous place for receiving the variety of Catholics from all across Europe. The city is still divided into neighborhoods identified by the immigrants who first occupied them. There's the Polish part of the city. There's Yuki Town, where the Ukrainians moved to, and now the South Side Mexican part of town that feels more like Chicano Town than Chicago City. But they were very much the product of their creation. Not simply, for example, the Poles who were uprooted and planted back on the other side of the ocean with all of their leaves intact. It's the same for the families who come to Oklahoma City to make their lives here from south of the border. They have made their own lives and comport themselves according to their own identity. They're not just Mexicans in Oklahoma, but Oklahoma Mexican culture here and now. Those who come here to serve them will encounter this culture in all of its distinctiveness, in its divisiveness, and in its beauty. We hope to be able to benefit from the best of the missionary spirits that they will bring with them as they encounter the culture here. The cardinal there in Guadalajara wrote a letter to all his priests and invited anyone who would consider coming here to make it known to him. He promised he would consider their request and honor their desire to serve here in Oklahoma. The cardinal also made it clear to Archbishop Coakley that he wanted his priests to be able to express their missionary desire and their decision to come and serve, which means the priests from Mexico aren't coming just because we need more priests to say Mass and hear confessions. They're coming because they have an experience of the gospel that they are compelled to share with us. Rather than simply be manpower for us to apply to our needy parishes, they are to be vessels of spiritual power brought to enliven and amplify the work of God among us. In the great dispensation of God at work among us, there isn't any other reason to leave behind what is well known and familiar and to make a life amid those who are foreign and unknown. to be a missionary or stay home. This is a vital element in their presence here, both for the Mexican people living here, as well as for all the rest of the Catholic Church in Oklahoma. It's something we know. For example, take those who support Father Joe Ewan's mission in Peru. Father Joe is from Oklahoma City. He grew up in Christ the King parish. He eventually made his way to the Diocese of Piura in northern Peru, where he was ordained a priest. Upon being assigned to his parish, he threw himself into the work there and shaped his life according to the needs of the people there. As a part of his work, he invited the people of Oklahoma to support him and to be a part of his projects there. And people here have responded mightily. It's now common to have groups to go down to Piura and stay for a week or two and help him and his parishioners to make the place better. It's valorous work among all those who go. But going for a week to build houses isn't the same as giving your life to the work there. The missionary work is to bring the gospel of Christ in all of its fullness to those who most need to hear it. This is done by those who are willing to vest themselves in Christ's presence and then share that presence with everyone. Father Joe isn't manpower. He's a missionary. That's what the priests from Guadalajara are invited to become. We want to invite them to bring the message of Christ to us in ways we haven't thought of and we haven't found yet. Were they to arrive and simply fit into our rectories and fill out our Sunday schedules, we wouldn't be making the best use of their experience and their vocation. Missionary life is creative and innovative. It's full of challenge, but also filled with opportunity and uniqueness. All of this we want to invite to flower among those who bring Christ to us as they come among us. We want the gift of Christ poured out among the church of the state of Jalisco in Mexico to be given to us here in Oklahoma. This would be the great gift of the Mexican church to us in our time. Oklahoma has been the beneficiary of the missionary spirit throughout its whole history. According to the Catholic Encyclopedia, the first Catholic church built in Oklahoma was in 1603 in the Ouachita in the southeast part of the state. It was staffed by Spanish missionaries coming up from Mexico. When the vicar apostolic to Oklahoma's territory was named, Theophil Meerschaert, who later was ordained bishop here, he brought men from his native Belgium to serve throughout the state. At one point, more than 80% of the clergy had come from his region of Belgium, many of them relatives of his. They left behind a settled and established and intricate church, notable for its piety and peaceableness, and they came to stay amid the jumbled frontier of Indian territory. These men brought the Spirit and led the building of the church here. Their gifts, their knowledge, and most of all their commitment is what made us. Without them, and without the gift of their lives, the church would never have even begun here, much less have been sustained here. From the beginning, we've been the product of missionary life. And one aspect of missionary spirits, their missionary spirit, that I'm most excited to encounter from the priests who come, is their knowledge and experience concerning vocations. The Church of Guadalajara has been amazingly successful in promoting and sustaining vocations among its young people, both men and women. Of course, Oklahoma City isn't Guadalajara. The church here isn't the same as the church there. But they do know something we don't. Their seminaries are full and have been for generations, while ours have not. And while we may dismiss what they're able to do in a predominant Catholic culture compared to the secular ocean in which we swim, Guadalajara is a large, urban, sophisticated capital of business, art, and technology and government. There isn't anything here that's not also there when it comes to distraction, vacuity, vanity, and evil. I hope that they can help open a door for us that has remained, for the most part, closed. It would be grand were we to tap into the generous spirit of those young men and women who want to make their world different through the gift of their lives offered in vocation. All of us know how much the church in Oklahoma has already been transformed by the presence of the Mexican church among us. There are many markers of this transformation. My favorite is in the parish hall of the parish in Woodward. In the Parish Life Center there, as you open the front door and walk down the hall, they have pictures on the walls of the First Communion classes throughout the years. In 1960, there were 3 children in the First Communion class. In 1968, 4. In 1976, they were back to 2. But beginning in about 1985, the faces in the pictures began to seriously increase in number. In the year 2007, there were 40 young people gathered around the altar at St. Peter's Church, all of them staring into the camera, dressed in their Sunday best, and all but 2 of them had brown faces. What had been for generations a small outpost in the western part of the state, a small respite of Catholic presence in the thinning soils of the up-tilted highways heading to the Panhandle, has been transformed in the course of 1 generation into a major parish filled to the brim with the next generation prepared to make the church alive there. And this is a reality throughout our diocese. Certainly it has been the case in Oklahoma City, especially at Sacred Heart. It is my prayer that we strike oil as we make our case to the priests of the Archdiocese of Guadalajara. Your prayers are welcome. Pray that God inspire his priests to bring refreshment to us all by way of their missionary presence here among us. And pray that we may all benefit by the continued outpouring of God's graces brought to us by them. The age of apostles, with their preaching and miracles and wonders, has not ended. It continues here and now. May the great growth of God's work among us continue in every way as we open the door to the priests of Guadalajara. Who knows? The future of the faith and its manifestations are truly known only to God. What may be among us in the time to come? It may be that this is a new chapter in the book of God's graces at work in our small outpost of God's goodness. And ultimately, we can all help write it. Back in just a moment. Back to our final segment, Faith in Verse, a poem today called The Sad Crosses. The sad crosses that fill our spaces, we walk apace. Through the shadows they cast, first, middle, and last. They are everywhere present, in our journey unpleasant. They lay hard and trying to our observant eyes. They are not decorations or easy beauty. Leave us mute, you see, as we remember their stark meaning, which is past seeming, sad or bitter, but contains the story of the heart of the Lord's glory as he goes to trial and execution, to be laid in the conclusion, pierced and given to death, a sort of devil's bequest who delights in failure and destruction, to be surprised at the seduction of Easter morning, the transformation of Jesus rising, the generation of new life from ashes where he lay, to bring darkness into day for us all who are destined to wait as we come late to the story of crosses everywhere we look. And no, we are not forsook. The Lord gave us promise in thickets by these wicked reminders that we have sprung up all around us. We need not fuss, for God has rescued forlorn humanity from its losses. That's The Sad Crosses. The work of the church is among us continually because we are the church. And as we encounter Christ and that encounter enlivens our hearts are transformed. And they're transformed by our desire to fulfill the will of the Lord as we find it, as it's given to us in our lives. That's the missionary spirit. That's how the world is transformed, and that's how we bring Christ to others. It's our hope that in Living Catholic that we continue to explore both the invitation that we have to know and to encounter God's will, as well as the invitation to be empowered by the Spirit to fulfill that will among us. I hope that in the weeks to come, that all of us together can continue to explore what it means for all of us together to be Living Catholic.
Living Catholic is a production of Oklahoma Catholic Radio. To To learn more, visit okcr.org.